Hello, my name is Jesse Fisher. I'm the author of Preserving Liberty by Exiting the Matrix presentation today, and I've authored an ebook which can be found at matrixexitplan.com. It's called Your Matrix Exit Plan. And the idea is that our personal liberties are at risk in today's society, and that the matrix of dependency has a stronghold on us, but there are ways, a whole continuum of ways that we can extract ourselves from those dependencies and increase our personal liberty. So I hope you'll enjoy this presentation. Here in these crazy times, as society slides further into moral, political, and economic corruption, as a liberty-loving people, I'm guessing you would prefer to live in a way so that your family is not vulnerable to manipulation by corrupt politicians, bureaucrats, or big tech. Today we're going to explore how to exit the matrix of dependencies and significantly increase your ability to enjoy personal liberty. Before we can exit the matrix, we have to face the fact that we are dependent on the matrix for our very lives. We are dependent on banks and mortgage companies for our housing. We depend on local stores for most of our food and all of our clothes. We depend on our cities for our life-giving water, our electricity, and to deal with our wastes. But the initial weeks of the COVID pandemic showed us just how fragile our supply chains truly are. The system is rickety. Why does being dependent on society matter? Well, it matters because dependency disempowers us from working together for positive change in our communities. We are so busy earning our keep in the matrix that we are just too tired at the end of the day to work towards positive change. When we finally get home, we just want to relax. And aren't we somewhat hesitant to get involved politically because our coworkers or our bosses might cause problems for us if they found out what we were doing? Remember how concerned parents made it on the FBI's watch list and were arrested at school board meetings? Dependency restricts our ability to say no to liberty-destroying social norms. Were you at liberty to refuse the so-called vaccine? Was your job threatened if you didn't get the jab? Did friends or relatives ostracize you because of your lack of enthusiasm for the jab? And here's the big one. Will you be in a position to refuse to use the government's central bank digital currency when it rolls out very soon? Will your employer insist you accept CBDCs as payment? Will you lose your job if you refuse to accept them? Let's explore your options for dealing with the matrix of dependencies. Option number 1, join Agent Smith. And like the character Cypher, you can choose to stay in the matrix of dependency and enjoy its delicacies. The upside is that you might survive the coming tyranny and/or chaos. One downside of remaining in the matrix is you'll likely be called on to sacrifice your integrity and/or violate your conscience. Another downside, evil usually turns on its own, eventually. Option 2 for dealing with the matrix, get wealthy and buy your security. The upside is that affording good attorneys could keep you safe. The downside, it usually takes decades to build sufficient wealth to buy your security. And another downside, the wealthy are often called on to donate to the cause, and they get sucked in. Another approach you can take to the matrix is to fight Agent Smith. Let's explore that option. Hoard food, weapons, and ammunition in your bunker. That should do it. And when things fall apart, like in many post-apocalyptic novels and movies, you can hunker down and defend your town from roving bands of marauders. Who knows? Maybe you could join the boys from the mountains and save the Constitution. The upside, your conscience will be clear. You won't have to compromise your principles. And you get to feel like a freedom fighter, part of the righteous resistance. The downside, you become an enemy combatant, and a big fat target is put on your head and your family. Option 4 is to shelter in place and to cut as many of the strings of dependency as possible. This is the option most preppers take. They may turn their yard into a garden, store a year or two of food, buy a backup generator, and if they're really ambitious, they'll put up solar panels on their house. This is a good option. Let's look at this option. And then I'd like to invite you to consider what I think might be a better one. Big benefit of sheltering in place is that preppers remove as many of the strings of dependency to minimize their vulnerability to an overbearing society. They do this by producing as much of their own food, water, and power as they can wherever it is they live. Another upside is that the outside world could literally go to hell and you would just keep doing what you're doing. But there's a downside. If you're that one person in the neighborhood who is actually prepared, guess who your neighbors are going to snitch on? Another downside, unless they're really careful, these folks are going to stand out like a covered wagon on a 4-lane highway. And where do you think your hungry neighbors are going to come when they get desperate? Now here's a possible solution. I think it's a near ideal solution. I call option 5 ultimate preparedness. So you're cutting the strings of dependency and you're surrounding yourself by others who are also cutting the strings. In theory, if everyone in your town has cut the strings of dependency, you could enjoy the upsides of doing that and avoid the downsides. Why would your neighbors snitch on you if they're doing exactly what you're doing? You won't stand out in your neighborhood because all your neighbors are doing the same thing. And no one will be banging on your door demanding food because all of your neighbors will be producers, not consumers. Sound a little too idealistic? Well, I'd encourage you not to discount this option too quickly. In the Matrix movies, when the people took the red pill and woke up, they were able to escape the matrix of dependency. But where did they go? In the movie, the city where the disconnected humans lived after exiting the Matrix was called Zion. And since they were living there for quite some time, apparently they had figured out how to produce all their own food, water, and power. The personal cost to join the humans in Zion was significant. They had to give up all the conveniences of the Matrix, all its delicacies, and rely on themselves to build a new life of independence and freedom. Freedom is not free. Like the rebels in the Matrix, there is a nonprofit initiative called Operation Self-Reliance, which is building independent towns like Zion in the Matrix. OSR is actually planning on building 5 off-grid communities along the Rocky Mountains. The first of these OSR communities is Riverbed Ranch, Utah, which currently houses about 130 people, of which somewhere around 50 are children. They have homes, barns, shops, and greenhouses. They have orchards, solar systems, and wells. Riverbed Ranch has a fully trained volunteer fire department with 2 trucks, a concrete plant that can deliver concrete the next day. Try that in Salt Lake. Spring and fall festivals with activities for the kids. A co-op store that sells gasoline and diesel. 1,245 acres of debt-free farmland. An LDS branch, if that's of interest. A homeschool co-op. A solar-powered welcome center to receive visitors and host socials. Bulk buying opportunities for building and gardening supplies. I'm building my own off-grid self-reliance homestead surrounded by hundreds of others at Riverbed Ranch. Here's my debt-free home on 2 acres. I have over 4 acre-feet of water shares, my own 205-foot deep well, and a solar power system that is EMP hardened. Our goal is for every household to independently produce all their own food, water, and power. The rest of the world could fall apart, and we'll just keep growing food and raising kids. Costler Cove is our second off-grid community. It's located east of Snowflake, Arizona. We've purchased 1,298 acres just this summer. It already boasts a beautiful man-made pond, a welcome center, multiple tiny homes co-op members can rent while they build out their homesteads, the kernel of a co-op store and a tool rental operation, and a tractor with multiple implements, and, you'll never guess this one, a sauna. Seriously. Now, whether or not you have the courage and or the resources to do what I and others are doing at OSR's off-grid communities, you can still create your own matrix exit plan to minimize society's control over your life now and in the future. It can be done in 4 challenging steps, and these are essentially a continuum. It's not that difficult to do the first 2 steps. The 3rd and 4th step take a little bit more effort. The first is to prepare to exit the matrix, prepare to unplug. The second is to become a producer. I personally am offended when I'm referred to as a consumer. No, I'm a producer. Now, if you happen to have the resources, you can physically unplug from the matrix. And then once you do that, you want to help build your Zion community. All right, let's look at preparing to unplug. The first step is to master your finances. Start a budget and stick with it. Save a percentage of your income. Pay off all your consumer debt. Figure out a way to be mortgage free. If you go to translate.google.com, type in death pledge and translate it into French, the word that comes up is mortgage. In my ebook that you can order at matrixexitplan.com, I discuss a method that can be used to pay off a 30-year mortgage in 9 years. You might want to check that out. Now, you'll also want to flee corporate America. Corporate America is now being used by the government in these public-private partnerships, they call it. Well, that's actually what Nazi Germany did. Another word for it would be fascism. In fact, you remember how the U.S. government used corporate America to enforce their COVID restrictions. That's only going to get worse. And get your kids out of the government schools. Another word for those are indoctrination camps. All right, second big step. Most people can do this. Become a producer. Produce as much of your own food as you can. Gardening. Try bucket gardening if you don't have a yard. Lots of people grow food in their apartments. Find ways to do this. YouTube is a huge, great, wonderful resource. Produce as much of your electricity as you can. Now, word of caution, some communities will allow you to connect to their electric grid, but in their law, it says that they own your system or they control your system. So all the electricity you produce belongs to them. You want to make sure that's not the case before connecting to their power grid. Producing as much of your own water as you can. There are multiple ways of doing this. I once tried digging a 50-foot long trench, covering it in plastic with a pipe down the middle to gather the water. On paper, this would have produced 3 quarts of water a day, which you could survive on. Obviously, drilling a well would be more effective, but it's also substantially more expensive. But anyway, there are other ways of producing water. Research it on YouTube. And of course, we're really good at producing wastes already. It would be good to learn how to process your own wastes. If you think about any kind of crisis that might happen, be it an earthquake, tornado, hurricane, solar flare, EMP blast, all of these will take out your city's sanitation system. You need to already know and have a process in place for dealing with your household wastes. Okay, so that's step 2, become a producer. Most people can accomplish some of these things. Now, step 3 is to unplug from the matrix of dependency. And typically that means going completely off grid. And this is typically going to require some serious assets. Not everyone can do this, as it requires somewhere in the neighborhood of $225,000 to do this right. That's kind of a bare bones minimum to get your septic, your solar, your water well, build a 600 to 800 square foot house, put up a greenhouse. You could do it on less, but that's a solid figure. Now, one option is to do solo homesteading. This is typically what most people think of when they think of homesteading. You know, going off the grid, buy 20 acres up in the mountains, build a cabin, move your food storage there, and wait the crisis out. Now, the downside is that generally females need more social interaction than we males. Okay, just a fact of the difference between the genders. I don't think there is a male who has read the book Walden Pond that hasn't dreamed of living alone out in the woods. But typically our wives and daughters haven't. So that's one downside. Another downside, if roving bands of marauders were to find your homestead, you would be hard-pressed to defend yourself all by yourself. So another option is what I call social homesteading. Social homesteading is moving into a community where everyone's homesteading. That way you have the upside and avoid all the downsides of homesteading. Operation Self-Reliance has a website called osrcommunity.com where you can learn a little bit about this option here in Utah and Arizona and wherever the next 3 OSR communities are going to be built, probably Idaho, and we'll see after that. The Operation Self-Reliance Initiative, or OSR, is an effort to build these 5 communities along the Rocky Mountains. I'm personally involved in that and would invite anybody who's considering social homesteading to check out that website. Another option is to go to ic.org, and that stands for Intentional Communities. IC.org is the website of a nonprofit. It keeps a database of off-grid communities around the country. You're welcome to go there and find some communities that might match your values and would work out best for you. All right, that's unplugging, going off-grid. Okay, step 4. Once you've gone off-grid, perhaps in a community, step 4 would be to build your Zion. In other words, help your community develop resiliency. Resiliency is the ability to endure challenging times with grace. And to do that, you'll want to strengthen the local economy. Everyone in an OSR community, for example, is invited to produce something at home, some good or service in a home-based business that can contribute to the local economy, so that if the community ever has to stand on its own without the outside economy, then there'll be a wide variety of goods and services. Another thing you need to do to build your Zion is to develop networks of trust. And what this accomplishes, I would hope this is obvious, you need to earn the trust of your neighbors so that when challenges do come, you're able to work together to solve problems. And that's really the next step, is solve problems with your neighbors. Let me give you an example from Riverbed Ranch. The winter of 2022 to 2023 was extremely wet throughout the whole entire western U.S. And Riverbed Ranch was no exception. It was very wet, and we had lots of people getting stuck out on the county roads in mud pits. So what our group did is they set up a Facebook chat group called the Rescue Rangers, and they would take turns going out and pulling people out of the mud who happened to get stuck that day. So someone would post, "Hey, I'm headed to a nearby town. I expect to be there by 2 o'clock. If I don't respond by 2:30, please come get me." No government required. The residents came together, solved a problem on their own. This builds community resilience. The last item that I want to share is actually under step 4, but it's actually the root of the entire challenge of exiting the matrix of dependency, and that is taking personal responsibility. We are so conditioned as Americans to depend on the government to solve our problems for us. In order to be free, we must take responsibility individually and socially in our communities and in our lives. And if we discover that we have personal challenge taking responsibility, we need to conquer that, overcome it. You can't be free if you can't be responsible. Okay, that's our 4 steps to exiting the matrix of dependency. I challenge you to get as far along this continuum of steps as you can using the resources that you have at your disposal. This is how you can increase your personal liberty now and in the challenging times ahead. If you would like more details about these steps, I've created a 87-page ebook at matrixexitplan.com that will go into greater detail, give you ideas and techniques and principles that will help you in your journey. I wish you all the best.